Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. Alright, hi, this is Attican and welcome to another Railway Empire video. We are going to play the new scenario from the Great Lakes DLC. We're going to play Very Hard AI and Pro, which is the most difficult game level they'll give us. Will be the General because he's our only choice, and here we go. This is a really good scenario. So I'm going to keep quiet while Sir Watkin introduces himself. Just watch what goes on and I'll explain later.
Here to the British colonies at the request of the Duke of Newcastle. I was entrusted with the weighty task of checking whether the remaining North American colonies could be united into a self-regulating dominion or not. A requirement for this, however, is to take care of the finances of the Grand Trunk Railway. And after a first glance on the balances, I am only conditionally able to express my horror in an adequate manner. You have been predestined by me to lead the Grand Trunk Railway into the future. To begin with, I have to make sure to myself that you are capable of this task. Nowadays, it is so difficult to find good staff. So let us start with something simple. The connection of additional towns seems to be tactically and economically obvious to me in order to clean up this mess.
So I think Sir Watkin is taking a breath, so let me catch you up. First off, I hate inheriting track and pre-made setups, and that particular one I especially didn't like. It was too complicated and was going to be too slow getting stuff in and out of the station. And I want to run dedicated lines, point to point as I call them, lines, because for me they're just easier to keep track of. I don't get as many goof ups. I don't have big stalls with trains piling up waiting on each other if I run dedicated tracks. So the first thing I did was delete all the track, all of it, and kind of started over. We're setting up a line between Montreal and Quebec. And our first two tasks are to connect the city of Saguenay, which is up there just north of Quebec, and our Lake Victoria city. And I'm actually going to have to see its name before I'll even attempt to pronounce it. I've forgotten exactly what the name is. But you'll notice I'm setting up, which is odd for me, a passenger mail only line. Now I'm doing this because I want to see what is going to happen in this scenario. What are they going to ask us to do? And we only have one source of meat and right now one source of beer available to us for our whole thing, and that's Trading Post in Quebec, which trades wood for meat, and a trading post in Montreal, which trades wood for beer. And so depending upon what we have to do with that, it's going to be a precious resource. I don't want to start shipping it around between Quebec and Montreal just yet.
Moving more people into these remote areas permanently, so that these lines will stay profitable.
So again, I'm setting up a passenger mail only because I don't know what needs to happen yet with the goods, and also want to get into more passenger mail. I typically don't do much of that, and I want to get into it. So we've got Saguenay, and now we've got Grand Lac Victoria. So I think that's the Great Lake Victoria or something like that, but I don't see a lake out there, so I don't know. My Canadian geography is woeful. My knowledge of Canadian geography, that is. So here I'm setting up a line. It's going to run into Canada. I know that the only meat source we have is Quebec. So that being said, we've got now with this setup, we have all three of the other cities lined up with
Let us
Quebec.
concentrate our attention on the supply and growth of towns. Sadly, the colonies are limited in their means of production. Many required commodities have to be imported, as there are no suitable industries. In Montreal and in Quebec, native commodities are being exported, and in turn, foreign quality goods arrive. The exchange rate is not quite lucrative, but the only option for the moment. Supply the people with everything they need. Only that way you can ensure the survival of new railroad lines.
All right, so we saw that in Quebec we trade logs for meat. And our task now that we've done our first two, we have to ship quite a bit of meat up to Saguenay. And so what we're going to do, first of all, is we need logs to trade so that we can get the meat into Quebec. And we're going to really use our warehouses. I took my time putting this together because I wanted to really use the new functionality. So here's the first case of it. We're putting in a warehouse right there to serve Quebec. And you'll notice I stretched it out as far away from Quebec as I could and up toward where the resources are coming from. And we're going to set up a line that feeds into that warehouse from this logging camp up here. So these logs will go into the warehouse, and with our new functionality, the warehouse is close enough to Quebec so that Quebec will be able to draw down from the warehouse and use the logs as needed. And in this case, since the logs are being consumed at a high rate to make the meat, and there's going to be demand for meat in 4 different cities here, it's going to be really hard to have enough logs, frankly. So we're going to run a number of trains into that warehouse with the logs, and again, they will feed into Quebec. Now we're setting up our line between Quebec and Saguenay to be automatic, so that it can take the start the delivery of the meat up to Saguenay, which is our task. We're going to make sure there's plenty of goods in this warehouse, and we're going to want to go out here and get wheat and start bringing that in as well. We're going to purchase the farm before we hook it up, and that way we can make money on the farm itself and on the transportation of those goods into the city to be consumed. And you'll notice here, I was really, it's tempting to merge those lines and run them in together, but I want dedicated lines because that way I can control the traffic that goes in and out much more easily. You can do it with the, particularly with the nice changes they made, where you can see the as you're setting up the line, you can see how busy the different platforms are. But these dedicated lines, to me, just give you so much control, and also, you just don't have, I don't have errors like a bunch of trains waiting on each other because the signals were messed up, or because I got too many too many things coming into a merger or something. I just avoid the mergers, and if you don't have merges, you don't have problems. It'd be like driving on a highway and you want to take a long trip, and you could get on a road that didn't intersect with any other roads. It just went right where you were trying to go. That's kind of the theory here. So these dedicated lines they really are the way I like to go. So now we've got wheat coming into the warehouse. So we'll get wheat and logs into Quebec at this point. And I'm thinking ahead, there's that warehouse up there above us, the one in gold. We know that's coming up. We know that's going to be a deal, and we know something's going to come up. In fact, I've actually made one little goof up here already, but we know that warehouse is going to be part of the deal soon enough. And just to comment while we're waiting on some more action to take place here, the warehouse there for Quebec, look how nice that is to have that warehouse away from the city, away from our other lines, so that we can have freight coming into Quebec or going out of Quebec, and for that matter, whatever we produce in Quebec could also go out of that warehouse, and have it away from everything else. So it really does cut down on congestion. And that was the whole point of this transport update version 1.5. And I got to give them an A+ for it so far from what I've seen. And again, what I'm trying to do in this video, particularly the start of this scenario, is really use that functionality.
More than just an annoyance. No getting through for the locomotives. Nobody will move to this area if the supply is not guaranteed year-round. Well, no problem that an alert mind cannot solve. Can you see the old warehouse close to Saguenay? We will use it to pile up supplies in the future. These supplies can reach the city year-round, and we can avoid a shortage. Connect the warehouse with your tracks and stock up the necessary commodities there, so that they will be delivered to the people of the city over time.
All right, so now we see more new functionality, the snow, and we see what a tremendous impact that snow has. It just literally stops your trains almost dead. They can sometimes move a little bit, sometimes they just stop cold, and it lasts for a month or two. So your economy really takes a hit. And what we've been instructed to do now is to connect up that warehouse, because they're going to want us to put meat in that warehouse as a task. And here's where I said I made a little goof. I should have left that topmost track number 1 in that warehouse open and bumped those other 2 down so that I have a more direct line. But I decided making this loop was just fine. I didn't want to go to the trouble of trying to move all that track, and I could have done that and made it look cleaner, but this is going to work out fine once I finally get all the track to flow correctly. It's tight curves, so it doesn't really like it very much. And no, it's not beautiful, but it'll work. And it's a very short run up there, so I'm not worried about the fact that I'm probably added 50 miles or so to the trip, or maybe more, at least 50 to the trip by having it go out backwards and loop back around. But just the same, there it is. It works. And then I realized I made goof number 2, and I ran it right back into an already used platforms, and I did not want that, so I'll fix that in a minute. But what we're going to do here is set up a line between the warehouses. So now we're going to emphasize or prioritize meat coming out of the warehouse in Quebec, and up in Saguenay, I think he called it Saguenay, Saguenay, I'm going to call it. In Saguenay, we set the warehouse to not send meat back. So we don't want to just walk meat back and forth between the warehouses. That's a waste of time and money. But what we do want to do is have those 2 warehouses linked so that we can bring logs and wheat into one, not have to set up a whole different set of lines, and then have that stuff move up to the Saguenay warehouse as well. So now we're kind of feeding both warehouses with one set of lines for our logs and wheat. And well, you'll see what happens later. We'll have to adjust this a little bit. But just the same, the idea is that now I've got goods coming into, I've got logs and wheat coming into Quebec, but they're also basically coming into Saguenay because they're able to be moved between the warehouses with just this single line, even if it is a curling a mess, but it still is a single line rather than having to build all new connections all over the place. So it saves you a lot of track and keeps everything cleaner. And now we're able to move stuff backwards and forwards between those two warehouses and serve both cities. That's the idea anyway. And here I had forgotten my signals and started a train running. So I had to delete that signal to let the train go through and finish its route. After it's back in the warehouse, then I can reset the signal and make sure all my signals are correct on the line. So there's goof number 3. I do make several mistakes here. I'm out of practice for one thing. And I make mistakes anyway. It's just by the nature of the beast. So now we're going to load up a couple more trains and make that line hum. And so we've got our logs coming in, we've got our wheat coming in, we've got meat being moved up to that warehouse, which is one of our objectives. That also then, of course, feeds Saguenay.
Self-sufficiently regarding the basics. Pile up supplies for the winter and take care of the settlements so that they can grow. That way, you will make this part of the Grand Trunk Railway profitable.
Now here I realize my mistake in terms of plugging that line into the wrong platform. So I'm trying to correct that. And again, because we got this tight curve here, the track laying tools aren't cooperating with me. But we'll work it out and get it to work. And there's an example. If you can't get the track to lay down for you in one direction, go back and try it from the other end. Sometimes that does the trick. And it does the trick here, and we have our track rebuilt, reset our signals, and now we're good to go. And now they're running out of a clean lane, so there won't be any conflicts between our logs, wheat, and our warehouse-to-warehouse lines. So everybody's got a dedicated platform to run on. Now we've completed both of our tasks for moving meat up to Saguenay, and now our tasks are to grow Saguenay, grow this Grand Lac Victoria, and to have a nice quarterly profit. And growing these cities is really challenging on this map in this scenario, and there's a number of reasons for it. The snowfall does make it tough, no doubt. Anytime that you lose about 1 to 2 months of train travel, obviously that's going to hurt you in terms of getting goods into these cities. But that's just one factor. Where they make sure that it kills you, where they really rub it in, is they have it set up where there's no corn in this entire area. So we have you can see we're very limited in the space that we have. We only have 4 cities that we can access in this map, and a limited area around those cities. So we can't go out and find corn or cotton or meat, cattle, whatever it is we need. It just doesn't exist. And on our map, as we can see it right now, our playable portion of the map. So you think about these this Grand Lac Victoria is an extremely small town. It's just like a little general store or I don't know, I may not even have a sheriff's office. I don't know. It's a really small place. So it needs wheat, logs, and corn. Well, there is no corn. So the best we can do is 2 out of 3 with the logs and the wheat. So that means the best growth we can get at the very beginning is 2 out of 3, and that's if we keep those two perfect. We have to keep them going. This next thing is the meat, and this is what we're dealing with here. Because of the snowfall, you can't get steady flows of meat going on a regular line like city to city. And that's the whole point of these warehouses, and that's why the scenario really drives this change home. So what you need to do is get meat into that warehouse even before, in this case, we need it before Grand Lac Victoria will even need it. So we're going to start shipping from our warehouse to the other warehouse. We're going to have another warehouse line. We're going to emphasize the meat coming out of Quebec, and we're going to say don't bring any meat or beer back to Quebec. So keep it out there in Grand Lac Victoria. So we're going to move goods back and forth between the two warehouses, and that's going to allow us also to take advantage of the setup we have. Now again, we're going to end up changing this, but the idea is that we've already started moving wheat and logs, so let's move them around between the warehouses as needed. And the main thing is let's get that meat out there into that warehouse. Now we know that Grand Lac Victoria is small and doesn't need the meat, but when it hits 15,000 population, it's going to suddenly have a need for meat. Well, now think about it like this. It needs meat, it needs logs, wheat, and corn. There is no corn. We said the best we could do is 2 out of 3. Well, when the meat kicks in, the best we can do is 2 out of 4, which means that Grand Lac is going to stop growing. And this is a pretty aggressive growth for these two cities out here in the wilderness, up in the snow, with very limited resources. So that's why we need this warehouse here. And we're going to preload it with meat so that Grand Lac can continue to grow. And once it hits the 15,000, it'll just keep going. So now we're lining up some trains to make that run between the warehouses and get that stuff out there to the Grand Lac warehouse so that we can be prepared for the winter and we can get them ready to grow. And we've still got a lot of work to do to make this work. But this is a good start to start getting the meat out there to that warehouse meat. And remember, a warehouse creates demand, whereas the city, like if we tried to do this with a regular city-to-city line, the city of Grand Lac would not have any demand for meat until it hit 15,000. Well, by then, the signal would go over to Quebec, hey, we need meat out in Grand Lac. And if it had meat, it would start loading it up on our automatic line running between the two cities. But it would take it a long, long time to get all the way out there. It's a long way from Quebec to Grand Lac Victoria, and we might get a snowfall in the middle of that and just stop completely. And all that time, Grand Lac is not growing. In fact, if you notice there, it has a red indicator next to its name right now, which means it's actually losing population because there's not getting enough resources to incentivize anybody to live there. So people are actually moving out. So we've got to fix that. So what we're going to do now is start pumping. We were wanting to move the goods between the warehouses, but we're going to take advantage of the fact that we've got that warehouse close, and we're going to move our logs and our wheat that's nearby here directly into that Grand Lac warehouse. And that'll do a couple things. First of all, the main thing, it will make sure that we keep the logs and wheat there for Grand Lac so that it'll have supplies. And secondly, it will cut down on the need for us to move those goods from our Quebec warehouse, which means that then those goods can be used in Quebec, which is a good thing. And what we don't want is a situation where we're just moving stuff back and forth between the warehouses that then nobody can use it if it's sitting there on trains. And by the way, those trains aren't making a penny if they're just moving stuff back and forth. So we're going to, because we've got logs and wheat close by to Grand Lock, we're going to move them directly in and load up that warehouse. And we're only going to need one train to do that. I double tracked it out of habit and in case I wanted to bump it up, but one train is going to be enough for that nice little short run to keep some logs over there in that warehouse. And we're doing one of my if you've watched a lot of my videos, my favorite mistake is to forget to put in enough supply towers. So we're correcting that. And one of the things we can see here is that the we need more logs, so we're going to expand our cleared area. Remember, we bought that. Well, maybe I shouldn't say remember. I don't think I mentioned it. We bought that as we were setting it up originally, and that was part of the theory. Remember, I did discuss this in the overview of the DLC and the version 1.5 update. Part of our strategy now, it always was, but now it just seems to make even more sense. Buy out those raw materials, the logging camps and the farms and whatever, whenever you can, whenever it's practical, and make money on them when you're shipping them. And with the warehouse, we even have an opportunity to kind of centralize and supply multiple cities from a single logging camp or a single wheat farm, which we will do that with the wheat here. The logs were actually coming in from a couple places now because it's more important to us to get the logs there than to make money off of our logging camp. But at any rate, we're setting up a separate line here to go logs directly to feed Saguenay because Quebec, that trading post, is just consuming lots and lots of logs. It's consuming every log that we can get down there. So we're going to have a separate line that puts some logs in that warehouse up there so that Saguenay can get logs as well. Because remember, that's our goal, is to get Saguenay. See that little green next to its name? That's what we want to see all the time. We want as much as we can, we need that city to be growing. Same thing with Grand Lock Victoria. So here we're setting up a separate line with logs coming into Saguenay to make sure that they get some logs too. Now here comes another heavy snow, but we notice that we're just teetering on the edge. And I've said this in other videos, the designers of this game did such a beautiful job. They know their mathematics because they just keep putting these cities in circumstances where they can almost hit 60%, but they can't quite get there. And that's what we've got going on here with Saguenay. We just can't keep it over that 60%. And one of the problems with it is that it has a worthless industry. In fact, both these cities have kind of poor industries, but Saguenay is particularly bad because it has an industry where it makes winter clothing. And to get the winter clothing, it needs furs and cloth. Well, we're going to address part of that problem, we're going to start shipping furs. You saw we're setting up now a line to ship fur down to our warehouse so that Saguenay can get the furs and provide those into its business. Now, the business is still worthless and the business is still hurting us in terms of growth because it needs cloth, and there's no way at this point in the game for us to get cloth. There is no cloth to be had. There's no cotton for us to get, so we can't open up a cloth business because we couldn't supply it with cotton. There's no trading post to get cotton or cloth at this point, so we are kind of stuck. So one option, that I'm strongly considering at this point, is buying that business, tearing it down and replacing it with like a brewery. Now that brewery would be awesome because if we had a brewery, then it would be getting beer, it'd be making its own beer, and we already given it wheat. So we would go from having a horrible situation like we've got now to a really great situation because the city would help itself grow. But right now, not enough money out there to do that. So what we're going to do is send this fur down. That'll help a little bit, and then we'll see what else we have to do in order to push Saguenay over the top and get it to its population goal. All right, let's wrap up this episode right here. We're off to a really good start. We're using the warehouses extensively, and we're dealing with some very tough challenges to try to grow these cities. We'll come back in part 2 and continue to grow our 2 target cities and building up our business. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.